Season 2, Episode 28 of Faith Over Breakfast. All right, so welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Eric. I'm from the Village, and I'm sitting across from Andy, who is from Mission Church.
In Tucson, Arizona.
Tucson, Arizona. This is Faith Over Breakfast, as I said. We had a conversation mostly about your experience celebrating 1 year in the building and engaging your neighborhood.
And hearing their feedback and such.
Hearing the feedback. And that was really cool. And maybe it makes people think a little bit about how they reach out and the meaning.
I think it could be helpful for if you're wondering how to engage. Maybe some of the things we learned would
be an encouragement.
Be an encouragement to you.
Yeah, definitely.
Life. Good deal.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so let's do this thing here. It is.
Eric, good morning. How are you?
I am doing good.
Yeah, you don't have any coffee. You don't have any food.
Yeah, no, I had breakfast with Chris Bloom this morning. So.
Oh, yeah. We all know who he is. He goes to your church, I assume?
He's 14.
14. Oh,
yeah.
What's up, Chris? Shout out to the
youngster. He listens to the podcast all the time, avid listener.
Avid listener, yeah.
I don't even think he knows.
All 14-year-olds are, I'm sure.
Yes, every single 14-year-old.
Man, I had breakfast with a 25-year-old, so, you know.
That's not actually far off.
That's no. Oh.
I'm sure he's...
Sorry, Corbin.
Yeah, Corbin's really happy about that one.
But, we, so it's Faith After Breakfast, I guess, today again, and...
you have your coffee, so...
I'm sipping a delicious cup of coffee made by my buddy David over at Rincon Market, so shout-outs to David.
Thanks, David. We used to, Rincon Market is kind of the beginnings of this whole podcast, so...
Yeah, and so we've explained the concept before, but... We used to, before a radio show we used to meet at Rincon Market here in Tucson, Arizona, and have a little discussion about what we were going to talk about on the radio show, and then get on there. And as it is with live radio, you don't get to say everything, and you get very little actual time.
You don't get to say anything.
Yeah, well...
Hi, my name is Eric. I'm pastor of the Village, and I think that's a bad idea. Okay, let's move on.
But the discussion at breakfast is always good. So
yes.
The reason we started this podcast was because we wanted the breakfast conversation, hence the name Faith Over Breakfast. And now we sometimes eat right before the podcast.
Yes.
But it is always right on the tail end of a breakfast on a Tuesday for us. So if you're joining us on a Friday, just imagine it's a Tuesday and have this little candid conversation with us. So, Eric, here's the deal. We... in typical form, haven't talked this through. You're just joining us for our little table talk. So actually our radio show used to be called Faith Round Table, though the table wasn't round.
Yeah, the table wasn't round. But before you bring the subject up, I, on the way here, had a great idea to unify the churches.
Oh.
So I think it's probably the most brilliant idea ever. And it will be serving Tucson. So this is how it works.
Doesn't involve Snoop Dogg.
It does not involve Snoop Dogg. So it's really good. So you know how lots of churches, they pay licensing fees for any number of things so that they can use them correctly.
Really?
Yeah, well, they're supposed
to do that?
Yes.
Oh.
You know, their music, all that stuff. It doesn't matter. All churches have some form of licensing fee for something. Most of them do. So what if we got every single church, no matter what denomination, even outside of the Christian faith, to donate to what we called the pothole abatement fund. And so the churches would take responsibility for the potholes of Tucson.
Did you hit the one on Plummer driving?
I avoided that one.
That thing is huge.
It's like becoming a crater.
It's insane.
But think about it. When people say, "Oh, we don't have potholes," why? Because the churches fill all our potholes. We could the analogies for the gospel and everything are just. This could be a thing.
This could be a thing
that unite us.
Can we do that? Can we? Can you go fill a pothole and not get in trouble?
Yeah, I don't know, but maybe we could do something along,
just
partnership.
Pay the company that does it.
Yeah, partnership with the city.
Man,
we could,
We'll just talk to Nick, my co-pastor, and say, hey, form a pothole filling company, and it'll be done tomorrow. Because he loves to start companies.
Yeah, so let's,
and then we'll just hire them.
Yeah, nonprofit,
Yeah.
Whatever.
Okay.
All right. So anyway,
what an idea.
There's my unifying idea.
Yeah.
Anybody want to take that, you can have it. It's all yours. Our church, I will just say it right now, even though the elders have not voted, we will be part.
Yeah, yeah, man. We could even come up with something like Churches United for Pot or something, and people would give so much.
Well, I felt like this idea kind of segues pretty well into your idea about church and neighborhood and all that. So talk to me about
absolutely.
this.
Well, so we, Nick, my buddy and co-pastor, and I had there's been a lot of we've been talking about at our church, wanting to meet the neighbors, and there'd been some talk about like a regular celebration of our moving to our new building, and we were going to move that from Christmas to our 1-year anniversary, but not this year, but next year. And then Nick and I just kind of had a conversation where we're like, look, we can talk all day about how to become friends with the neighbors, but let's just invite them to come have dinner at our church on our 1-year anniversary, which was this Sunday. We're like, let's not wait a year. Let's just invite them to come. And we had about a week, maybe a week and a half to really figure that out. And we're like, let's not, let's just cook in the parking lot and just put our normal dinner out there, and just invite people to come to dinner. Just see what happens. And
you have 2 apartment complexes, like one across the
flanking
street?
our church, basically.
Yes, you got
one on each side.
Very visible that you'd be having dinner out in the parking lot.
Yeah. And I don't think like our street is the main drag for the neighborhood, but it's one of them.
Yeah.
When people are coming into the neighborhood, they drive right by. So this thing got made up at the last minute, honestly. Like, we made a little flyer that I just hand drew it and put, Mike came up with the name Taco About a Good Time, because Mike likes to come up with, non-cheesy things.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The man's full of cheese, let's just be honest.
Yeah, and the tacos were full of cheese.
I bet you they were.
And
so did you hand those out?
Yeah, so then I've been saying, because there's been a lot of hesitance at our church of like, how do we engage, how do we meet people, and it's like, do we do a mailer, and I've been saying, and this, I would have argued against this myself at one point, but I've been saying, I think especially in our neighborhood, you just take the flyer to people's door.
Right.
And there's some pushback on that, like, well, people don't like people coming to their door, and it's like, yeah, I mean, I don't like some people coming to my door, but it's all about what you do. Like, there's a lady in my neighborhood who comes around with tamales, and the door rings, and I go, oh, who's that? And I open it up, and and it's her, and I go, oh, okay, hold on, let me see if I have $10.
Right. Right.
And then I had a guy come inviting for a church thing, but he was fine. He was just like, oh, hey, we're from the church down the street, and he didn't like try to come into my house and convert me. And so I was like, oh, thanks, dude, And then we've had the Jehovah's Witnesses come, and they're super pushy, and I actually took some of them out on the sidewalk and said, look, the people are being nice to you, but several of the neighbors have told me they don't like it when you do this, and they don't like that you keep coming back. And so, what we'd really appreciate is if you just dropped off your stuff and went away. So I've had all those experiences at my own home, but I was like, if we just hand a flyer and say, hey, we're the church right over there that you can see, and we're going to give you free food if you want Sunday, and there's no hidden agenda. We promise. We've been here a year. I think that's
that works.
That's going to work. I don't think it's going to hurt. And I was very unsure myself. Like, is anybody going to take us up on this? But people showed up. I mean, I think we had, considering that we walked the flyers out the night before. Mm-hmm. We had like 15, 20 neighbors come and sit with us and have dinner.
That's pretty cool.
It was great. It was actually amazing. One brought 3 platters of homemade empanadas, which were like amazing. And then other folks just came, and we just put a sign out that just said free food at 6:30, and put all the tables in the park. So some people just were walking by and just were like, oh, rad, So it was awesome. I loved it. Loved it. We had several of the neighbors wanted to see inside the church and, kind of toured people around. One lady asked if we would be open to her teaching English as a second language out of the church. And these are all people who have been on the street, been watching us, but we've never met.
Right.
Or one we'd met, but most we hadn't until this weekend. And so that's my little story. We got some feedback about our church that I find very interesting. I want to tell you about. But
I just want to say right now, because people cannot see the video,
That I'm excited. Or
that you're raising your hand as if you need permission
I'm
for
karate
this.
chopping.
Yeah, you may be. It first looked like you were raising your hand, but then you brought it down as a karate chop. So
Just like a your father move, actually.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen your dad do that? He karate chops.
Yes, he likes karate chop.
Yeah. I probably learned it from him,
Yeah.
which is probably why you're so excited about it.
Oh, yeah, very excited.
But have you? I think you guys have done things like this at the village, like in some way, shape, or form, right? Like,
Yeah, we have.
yeah. So what's that been like for you?
Well, I want to fully hear your story, then I'll tell you.
No, I want to. Let's go back and forth on this because okay. I know this isn't a novel idea. The feedback we got was, I think,
want
the
to hear
most
the
interesting.
feedback.
Okay, let's jump into the feedback. That's
and then I can give you our experience of the neighborhood.
Yeah, okay. So here was my favorite. So that what I learned, and maybe I knew some of this, but it sunk in. I learned that the people of our neighborhood wanted to know us, but didn't think they could just come. The people that we met, I think there's a general. We learned that people had no, they didn't think that just because a church was in the area that they could walk in, whether they wanted to or not. And I think there was just some general confusion about what we do and general confusion about what churches might do that we heard. So my favorite feedback was this one family that came and actually had a great time and hung out. They expressed that they'd been really curious about us. And I said, oh, why is that? And they said, well, Sunday morning, there's nobody here, And now we have a sign out that says church is at 4:30, right on the street. So, but their paradigm is churches meet on Sunday morning. So they were like, nobody's here. And then we hear this music, and I was like, oh, is that annoying or anything? And the guy was like, oh, no. It's actually like, it's just like sort of in the background. I kind of like it. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And then he's like, and then you guys are just like, you open this door and you're just doing dishes. And there's just all of these people doing dishes. And we've been trying to figure out, like, what do they do there? Like, they're not there on Sunday morning. They come, they're playing music, and then they're doing dishes.
All right, because you guys do your dishes outside?
Well, there's just the kitchen is on the side.
Oh, yeah.
On the side, and we kind of, usually the door gets opened, and you could just, it's probably kind of a loud, like everybody, there's this small group that clambers into the kitchen and does the dishes, and I think you just hear them and you hear the dishes. And so, I'm just imagining that, these folks are going like, what is that? Like, what do these people do? They just all show up at church, sing a song, and then they just bring their dishes, and they all do group dishes, and then they take them home, and then,
Everybody brings their own plate and their own fork.
I don't know. I don't know, but it was just funny because they were just like, what do you do? And I said, well, we just meet at night because both of our, these are two churches that got together, and we both met at night for semi-practical reasons, and generally some of our people are used to that, and it's kind of nice, and it's a little different, and so it's just church, and people come, and there's a little coffee out before, so some people come early, but then we have a worship service with music, and then somebody teaches from the Bible, and then we sing a few more songs, and then we have dinner, and we do the dishes, and they were just like, oh, that's awesome, like,
sure.
And then they were like, could we come? I said, yeah, absolutely, of course, And then and there was another lady who came, and she was she's like, I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years. I've been watching you guys for this past year, and like, kind of was like, you did a good job on the building, thank you. But she was like, this was a very good idea. And I was like, what's that? She said, inviting us here to have some food, very good idea. I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then she was like the one who wanted to teach, and she's like, could I like teach an English class in this building? And I was like, probably. I was like, we'll talk about it, And she was like, so it wouldn't be like a Christian English class, I was like, oh, I mean, are you a Christian? She's like, oh, here's how I say it, in like to my friends from Mexico. It's like, she's like, I'm an atheist, but don't mess with the Virgin Guadalupe, like I still have some faith or whatever.
No, don't mess with the Virgin.
And I was like, okay. I was like, but I mean, you're teaching English though, right? Like not like, just English. She's like, yeah. I was like, oh, that's fine. I was like, Like, that's just good for the community, right? She's like, yeah. I was like, well, then, I mean, that's okay. Like, if you come in and, like, teach that, God is a lie or something, but if you're teaching English, and she was just like, oh, okay. And she's like, could I come to the service sometime? I was like, yeah, anytime you want. And so I think her nerves were like, if my beliefs if I'm not 100% all in, can I come?
Right.
Be around? Would you allow me in this building? Right.
Right.
And then another lady was saying a similar thing, that she'd been watching us, and she was just like, I would love to come here. Could I come? And I said, of course. And could I bring my daughter? Of course. And she was just like, I just don't, I just didn't know if I could come. And I think one of my big takeaways was, number one, I have this assumption from being involved in church that I could see any church and I assume they want people to come.
Right, because you've been there.
Because I've been there.
And grew up there.
But then it settled in, and I think I could have told you this, but it settled in hearing it from several people. No. Generally, even people, like all of these people, I think were saying they weren't uncomfortable with God, but they didn't think they could come into the church. Like, they didn't think when they saw our church, or probably any church, that they could walk in and be a part of it. So that was a wake-up call. That was a good reminder. I think people felt honored by being invited.
Mm-hmm.
And I am hesitant to invite sometimes because I don't want to make people uncomfortable.
Right.
But then realizing they're uncomfortable now. Like, if there's any chance they want to come around, they're not going to come without an invitation.
Right.
Right. And then just everybody's watching us. Like, that was my other, like, all these people were going like, we've been watching. Like, we've been wondering, we've been curious what you do.
Right.
Anyway, there you go.
Yeah.
So when have you done things like that, and what have you learned?
Well, I mean, when we first got the building, we did a very similar thing. We didn't do it on the year anniversary. I think we moved in, and the church itself, when we moved into the neighborhood, had maybe 4 or 5 people going to it.
And it was yours was a church. Ours wasn't.
Right.
Yeah.
So it already had some of that going. I mean, but people in the neighborhood hadn't been inside the church.
Right.
So we invited the neighborhood and the broader neighborhood to come see it.
Yeah.
Come inside, look at it. And we had people stationed all over the place because we hadn't done a lot to it.
Right.
To explain to people the kinds of changes we were looking to make and what it would look like. And so that was very successful in the sense that it let the neighborhood come inside and be part.
Yeah.
And it made it so that at the time, so some of the neighbors around our church have moved, but at the time, it made all of our actual neighbors, so, next door neighbors and back neighbors, we all had a relationship in the sense that they looked after the church. It was handy because, our building is right in the middle of the neighborhood, and at the time, when there's nobody going to the church, homeless people begin to take up residency there, and that's not a good thing. I mean, their condition aside, or it's just not good for the neighborhood. It brings in crime and those kinds of things. So they were just happy to have
a resident.
Yes,
like somebody
people
there.
moving in and out and that kind of thing. So, so that was good. The other issue that we run into is, and I don't know if your neighborhood's this way, your actual neighborhood is, as you said, but the Jehovah's Witnesses have really kind of pounded our actual street and neighborhood.
My actual street, which is closer actually to your church, interestingly.
Yes.
But it's been a little bit, but we were getting just like many repeat visits, and and that's where, like, I'd heard from neighbors, they were talking to me, maybe because I was a pastor, and going like, what do we say to these people? We're trying to be nice, and
right.
And I was like, yeah, you got to be clear. Like, if you don't want them to come back, you need to say, please don't come back. You don't have to be a jerk, but if you say it was nice to see you, and like they're going to take that as, I'm coming back next week.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things that we did after that is because we didn't want to go door to door and really do the same thing that Jehovah's Witnesses were doing. So
Right.
we sent out a letter explaining everything that we do, that they were welcome,
Yeah.
but that we didn't want. But we actually addressed the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
We also addressed the fact that I think it's Saint Cyril is right on the corner of Swan and
Yeah.
and so actually a lot of our immediate neighborhood is Catholic.
Yeah.
And so we didn't want to actually push in on their faith and say, hey, like we have a different version
Right.
of following Jesus, so you should come follow our version, because people are very strong in their Catholic faith in that neighborhood. So we want to be careful that way. So those two things we've done. When it comes to saying, hey, we're neighbors and that kind of thing, we have done Christmas caroling.
Yep.
And not gotten a response. And so I live in just this neighborhood basically next to our church. I mean, it's a few streets down. But what I've experienced even in our own neighborhood is that you can get people to come to a little party or something.
Right.
It takes a lot of work because people aren't out on the street in our neighborhood. And they all have those wrought iron. The way many of the houses are designed, it's a wrought iron gate and then the door.
Yeah.
So if you're going to talk to anybody, you're talking through a wrought iron gate.
Right.
And people don't like to come out and talk. They don't. When people walk in our neighborhood, it's actually hard to get people to smile at you and say hello.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of kids on the streets. So I don't know. I mean, so that's that section of the neighborhood. It's just difficult and to really engage that way, though we've tried.
Yeah.
So but that doesn't. So yeah, neighborhood-wise, like just as a friendly church, as an entity, we've not necessarily had a lot of response. But there are a number of people in the neighborhoods that come to our church and who we've engaged and helped because the church is there. And one of the things that we've done with the church is that if you come and knock on our door, we believe God sent you there. And so lots of people come and ask for help. And so we invite them into our community and into being part. And sometimes they stay for a while and go in our neighborhood, but it helps.
Has been the same in our first year and will be, I assume.
Yeah.
Like, especially with apartments and, the type of apartments next to us they lend to temporary. Like, it often is where somebody is landing for a short period of time, I think.
Yes.
So I expect us to see that. Yeah. So you guys sent the letter. I mean, we actually have noticed, and our neighborhood's really interesting. It's a real mix, like the church neighborhood, and even my physical neighborhood. Most people don't have front walls and stuff like that. Some do, but most don't. But the church neighborhood is a mix of some people do, some don't. But I think there are more people outside, a lot more people who take walks. I had the sense, I was like, I think in this area, a mailer generally.
So I could talk about mailers because we just sent one out.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Well, we sent a mailer to our neighborhood when we went to 2 services.
Yeah.
Because we thought, this is, we did it 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was actually relatively successful 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that there are people in our community right now who came because of the flyer.
Right.
So this year, so we decided to do it like maybe every 10 years we'll send out a flyer. Plus we wanted to say, hey, we have a second service. It's in the morning. You're welcome to come. We got some people, there's a few people who came and they didn't come back.
Yeah.
They, it was obvious that they were just wanting to check out what was going on.
Yeah.
But we got a lot of phone calls saying, we do not want to be on your mailing list.
Yeah.
Please take us off the mailing list. We've learned now that you need to not have somebody's name on there. So when we sent the mailer, we bought their names and everything.
Right.
Not a good idea. People do not like direct mailers to their name. Because I think they feel like either they're trying to be manipulated or they're on some list or...
Well, I think what's happened with all the phishing emails and people getting your info, which is a new fear. I think it wasn't as big of a thing 10 years ago. But now when you see somebody has my name and address, you think they've bought my info or got my info somewhere. Even though with mail, you can just go down to the post office and do that.
Right.
But or go online. But I think that triggers that fear, right? Where interestingly, walking up to the door, and I get, the people who were we were all nervous.
Yes.
I was one of the people who went and delivered these, and I was nervous as we went out. And then it didn't take long, like, to realize, some people were like, didn't really want to come out the door. And if you just recognize that and just go like, hey, we're from the church over there. We're doing a free dinner Sunday. It's our 1-year anniversary. You want a flyer? And a lot of those people were like, oh, yeah, thanks, and that was good. But some people, came right out the door, closed the door, wanted to have a conversation. Like, oh,
sure,
sweet.
Yeah.
And I don't think the mailer would have.
Doesn't have the same
effect.
face-to-face thing.
Right. And we also, we all just, I was wearing my Tucson Hip Hop Festival shirt and, had Abby with me. And, one of the other couples took their dog. And we didn't, talk about that, but it just happened very organically. I think we looked, casual. And so it wasn't, and the flyer was casual. It was hand-drawn and had, a really poorly drawn taco on it that said yum, and so it wasn't, this formal, and it wasn't. We weren't inviting you to, this formal thing. We're not trying to make you join our church. Seriously, just having a party.
Right. Well, and
one dude, this is my favorite. One guy heard it was a pool party and showed up in his swimsuit, and it was like, where's the pool? And then he went home. We were like, oh, sorry, man. We have a pool table. If you want to shoot some pool, but it's the best. I think Mike jokingly was like, oh, we could baptize you or something. And he was like, no, that's cool. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is when you think about, or at least I think about my own experience of, I guess what we would call evangelism or bringing the gospel to people, I feel like, one, I work in the world that you work in, which is church, and I grew up in church, so I have the same concept you do, that I think every church wants people to come to it.
Which some might not.
Yeah, they may not, but
and they don't want everybody to come.
Right.
They want a certain type of person to come.
But I assume they do. When I look at the church,
I do
think,
too.
Yeah, I make that assumption. But the other thing is, I also work in the world, and I'm not trying to be judgmental of other people or anything like that. It's just I work in the intellectual world. My church tends to be relatively intellectual, and so there are two kinds of people I run into. One is a kid who grew up in church or person who grew up in church, and they've rejected God, and so they have an idea what church is like, and they're pushing against that.
Yeah, and they probably want this more intellectual working out of things. Is that true?
Yes.
They want that. Yeah,
they want that.
We have that too.
And then I think the other kind of thing is I run into people who are very smart and have a strong sense of their atheism, and they're strong, and they have the suspicion that the church is just a con game,
right?
And so they're not watching the church carefully to see what they're about. They have their own preconceived notions, and it's adversarial,
right?
So I superimpose that on a lot of people, those two positions.
Yes,
because
I think we as church, the team that talked about this, presupposed those two on most people.
And I think, and maybe that comes because I've done a lot of college ministry, and so in some ways, college ministry, at least back in the day, I think it may be less this way. Maybe it isn't. It had an adversarial tone. Like if you said you were a Christian, you had to really work hard not to undo all the stereotypes to talk about God with people who, everywhere they're going, they're hearing a kind of an anti-God message. And or they have had some experience with Christians who are extremely judgmental and extremely, or I guess their mode of evangelism is a "you're going to hell" kind of mode, or they just see that Christians keep making a mess of things, or at least that's what's being pointed out. So you're always on the defensive. You're always that kind of evangelism. It's a very apologetics oriented, not what you're talking about, which is actually more neighborhood oriented, and where people,
It seemed like the big question, there were questions of, I think I subtly heard two things. One was, can I come around even though my life's not right?
Right.
Like I heard that like very clearly from one person, which I just told him, oh, like, you know, there are people who go to our church regularly who are having the same problem. And
you're like, and I'm one of them.
And it's me. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's just the truth.
And she was just like, actually, I think like, oh, really? You know? And
right.
like, oh yeah, for sure. The other thing was just like, do you want me?
Yes.
It had, you know, it wasn't like, am I going to disagree with you? Are you smart enough? Just like, do you even want me?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think you're right in the sense our culture, what your experience is, it's become more and more like its mooring is lost. It doesn't have, and so people are looking at the church, which seems at times to be moored and to be connected to something. And they're like, right. Can I actually be part of that? Or do I have to like jump through all these hoops to be part of that? Or what's
right. And even by be part of it, just like, I mean, the first question is just like, would you even want to talk to me? Like,
right.
Can I even come in the door and like think, like just not think about your message? Probably it's
right.
First, like, can I just come in the door and will you guys just want to talk to me?
Yeah.
You know, or just have me around. Yeah. Yeah. So that it was really helpful to hear that and see that in some really tangible ways. Just made me think that, you know, and I've known this and heard this, but I guess just an encouragement to the people listening, like invite people to church, and not just for the sake of like converting them, you know, like that could happen, I guess, but let people know that you wish they were there.
Yeah.
Just because, I mean, I was thinking about, somebody was talking to me about dating the other day, and they're like, where do you meet people? And I was like, you know, I mean, if you're a Christian, like usually like in some kind of church context, and if you're not, you know, then you go find some group, if it's the group that gets a beer every night, or the group that does, you know, water harvesting together with a passion, or, you know, you get in a circle of some kind, and that's where you're going to meet people. And it dawned on me that, you know, so many people don't have a family, a
right.
circle, right? And one of the biggest appeals of the church, and I don't think this is all wrong, is like that there's a family to it.
Yes.
And you know, I think we have this
part of it.
We have this weird sense that you have to come in through doctrine first.
Right.
But how'd you even become a Christian? Most of you through your family.
Right.
And so sometimes people are going to come in through relationships, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, you're always going to come through relationship.
Right.
I mean, it's very rare that you just
have this
epiphany
change of you're like, oh, I have a new worldview all of a sudden, and I think I'm going to go down to that building down the street and go in there.
Well, I think it's interesting that you that maybe your church building itself and the collective of your church is a better witness,
right,
than the individual,
right.
In the sense that
sure.
Sometimes when you're with your friend and you're trying to get them to come to church, there's this weird, odd pressure sometimes that makes it strange. But when the church is in the neighborhood and people are watching it, and then all of a sudden they're invited into a larger entity,
right? There's
not any particular individual and relational thing happening there until they meet you sitting on the or in the parking lot.
Right.
That may be changing. I mean, there's a big movement now about neighborhood churches and parish churches, and you know, ministering to the neighborhood.
Well, and we know that because we're in church circles, but our neighborhood doesn't know that.
No, they don't.
You know, and that was and I think I knew this technically, but again, you know, it's another thing to experience it and hear it from somebody. But just the fact that your church is there doesn't mean people think it's for them or they can come. It dawned on me, I was thinking about it. Say I'm walking through a neighborhood and I see a building, an unmarked building.
Right.
And I hear somebody talking inside. Do I think I should go in there?
Right.
No, of course not. I think somebody's in there doing a thing for them.
Yes.
No, it's not for me.
Right.
And that's what it's like to look at a church if you're not used to going. It's they're doing a thing. It's for them. And so we probably need to be very, very intentional to say, you're welcome here. And here's what it is, you know? And yeah, it was just helpful to think that through and experience that this week. That people, when you went and said, you can come here and have some food with us, they went, oh, I'd like that.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, that was good. Yeah, it's hard. It almost feels like those of us who grow up in the church, we have an advantage and a disadvantage. And the major disadvantage is we can't see what it's like for just your everyday person to see what it would be like to watch a church do its thing. Whatever that is.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, I think we live in a very churched culture, even when we talk about it being unchurched.
There's still people have a set thing they think.
So you're not walking into the city and talking about Jesus, and it's a whole new thing. And so you're the one church, and now everybody's trying to figure out what that is.
Right. People have a paradigm and an assumption of some kind, right? Of what this is. There was one of the people who came, when we first went to their door, immediately was just like, "Are you this kind of church?"
Right.
They had a type in their mind, and we weren't, that at all. And I was like, "Oh no," and I didn't say like they stink or anything, but I was just like, "No," and I didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but I think that was, they were like, "Oh, okay, if you're that, I'm not interested. Seen that, done that."
Right.
But then when they were like, "Oh, you're not," they're like, "Okay, cool, I'll be there." And they were.
That's cool.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's, my experience is that there are a lot of people, in particular in Tucson, who have tried out church.
Oh, for sure.
And then they maybe even went for a year or two.
Right.
And then they either it just wasn't for them, or something happened,
right,
or they didn't feel a part. And instead of looking for another church,
they just
just stopped.
I tried it. Yeah.
And they weren't people who grew up in the church. They believe in Jesus, but maybe their doctrine or how they understand a relationship with Jesus is not something that is completed yet. And they just walked away, and Well,
I think we in Christian circles have to imagine, like, we would do the same. Like, imagine that you were starting to think, like, I think it's actually about enlightenment and Buddha.
Right.
And you were like, I'm thinking about this. It's on my mind. I'm going to try Buddhism out. You'd probably you'd pick one temple.
Yes.
Right? And you'd go there and see what it's like. And you would probably decide that Buddhism was like that one temple.
Mm-hmm.
And you would either be really into it, or you'd go, no, it wasn't for me. And then you'd go around and tell all your friends, yeah, Buddhism wasn't for me. I tried that.
Right.
Well, you tried it at that one temple, right? That's what a lot of people's experience with church is they try Christianity, they see one version of it, and for some of us who've been in church circles a lot, we know there's a lot of flavors. There's a lot of different.
Yes.
This gets worked out in many different ways, and they're not going to just keep trying a different one.
Right.
They're going to be done.
And I think what was kind of remarkable, because I've had a few of these conversations recently, is that nobody really noticed that they left.
Right.
Nobody said, why'd you go? Because they went and tried out, Calvary Chapel.
Right.
And they tried it out for a year, and nobody,
Well, and even if you come to a small church for a few weeks and you go, my assumption from my background is my family tried churches and we left and we went to another one.
Right.
So I assume if you probably went, it wasn't for you and you went looking for another one. So I feel bad.
Right.
Like calling and going, oh, what's going on?
Yeah.
But maybe that would be nice.
Yeah.
Like, if you take yourself out of the Christian Forever experience, like maybe they're going, oh, nobody even noticed I left. Nobody cares.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, certainly if you were there for a year, then you left and nobody said anything.
Right.
That would be interesting.
Right.
Probably wouldn't happen in a small church.
Well, typically when somebody's with us for a year and leaves, I know why.
Right. Exactly.
Right. There's been some kind of discussion, or they've leveled several complaints about the music or something, right? And I go, okay, I know why. Like
Right.
And then you start seeing pictures of them at the other church, and you're, oh, right.
Yeah, well, yeah. And we're dealing with the younger, so you kind of follow the younger person on their Facebook feed to figure out.
Which is weird, right?
Right.
It just happened to me. I saw somebody posting from another church, and I was like, oh, that's where they are. I went, oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Which is a weird.
It is a weird
thing. I kind of hate it, but it happens. Hey, that's been a solid conversation.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation.
Thanks for talking. Hey, you can email us at faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram at faithoverbreakfast. We have a Facebook page. We're out there. We don't.
We even have a website.
We even have a website.
faithoverbreakfast.org.
So we need. Here's the thing. I'm just going to admit we're not as good at the social medias as we should be.
Well, I'm not going to put the should. We are not.
Yeah.
And neither of us really cared that much to be.
Yeah, but I know that some of the conversation could happen there. So I just want to say to you, listeners, if you want to ask us a question on Facebook, or if you want to, when we post an episode, if you want to share that, or if you want to comment on it and ask us a question, we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
We'll definitely do that, and that would actually almost help us get more active if you engage with us there. So it's a weird thing to say, help us do social media, but please, honestly, that'd be fine.
Certainly, and I think, most of our listeners, though I know there are listeners around the world, but most of our listeners consist of your church and my church, and our friends and people who are connected to us. So I know I've gotten a lot of feedback, and you have. The people enjoy our conversation. They enjoy the way, just hearing two guys who have some different views on things, discuss things. But sometimes, we're busy people, and we don't have a lot of time to sit down and make show notes and try to think through things. So
if there's something you're wanting to hear, or
or like, man, I'd love to hear those two guys work that out with each other. Man, put it up there and we'll work it out.
Yeah, we'll talk about it over breakfast.
After breakfast.